Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm Javier Garza. I'm at Tarleton State University, and I'm going to share I'm just going to tell you what I do in my undergraduate analysis course. It's sort of an idea that has evolved, and I had some success, whatever that means. I'll tell you what the measures were at the end of the talk. But I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things that I do to try to bring about the outcomes that I'm interested in achieving. So it's basically, I'll say it's a modified Moore method, so that sort of gives you an idea, if you've got an idea as to what the basic Moore method is. I'm springing off of that, but there's some modifications that I've made to bring about certain changes in the outcomes. So I use Dr. Odell's course notes, regretfully, he passed away this spring, but he was always kind enough to share with me his notes, and there was a great set of notes. So I've used it on at least a couple of occasions now. I guess basically the way I assess their performance is this is everything. So they have to do board work, they have to do which is presentations, and I'm careful to use the word presentations. I'll tell you about what I mean by that in a minute. And then they also have some written work. I'll tell you a little bit more about how that comes about. And then we do exams. So I do a midterm exam and a final exam. Basically, with the midterm and the final exam, I ask them on the midterm, I ask them to do one proof. And I say new proof. It's a proof they haven't, I ask them to provide the solution or the proof of a problem that they haven't seen before. And because of that, and it was a 50-minute class, I only ask them to do one, because that's a challenge. So, but then aside from that, something that I've started doing recently that I'm very pleased with, it changes the dynamics, is I've started, when I teach this class, I make copies of all of the work that the students turn in, and I keep them. And so what I do when I give a test now is I take copies from past semesters, and I use those, and I have the students read those and basically determine the validity of the proof. And so the challenge to them is, say, yes, this is a correct proof, or identify the first invalid statement in the proof. And that's kind of that's kind of the basis for what we do. And so on the midterm exam, I give them one new proof to write, and then I give them basically 3 problems, and they have to read 3 proofs, and then basically either say, yes, that's a good proof, or circle the first invalid statement in the proof. And we focus a lot on that as we're moving along. We're talking about we talk a lot about determining or assessing the validity of statements. Final exam is pretty much the same thing. The only thing I add self-weighting on here. The only thing I do on the final exam that's different from the midterm is they have to do 2 new proofs because they have a longer time period, and they have to read 4 proofs instead of 3. But I give them 10 points for the written and 10 points for the critical reading parts. And I had them allocate those points based on their confidence in their ability to write the proofs or determine the validity of the proof. And my point in doing that, and I think that was very stressful to them actually, it was a good challenge, because the intent of that was to assess whether they could tell whether they actually had written a valid proof or not. Or it was basically a measure of the confidence. So that worked out very well. I was wanting it to be challenging, and they did find it very challenging. They were very uncomfortable with that. And my point wasn't to challenge their level of comfort. My point was to assess something that was kind of hard to get at, but that was very useful, I thought. So basically, as is the traditional Moore approach, their resources were the course notes, in-class discussion, and discussions with me. And in my office, as I was fortunate to have several classes under Dr. Neuberger, and in his office, he always had a big whiteboard on one of his walls. And so I have a big whiteboard on one of my walls. And so when they come into my office, we write on the board a lot, And so I think that facilitates kind of a lot of the discussion. It's a kind of an important thing I found. And I was I don't mean this in a selfish way or in an arrogant way or whatever, but this approach was very successful at getting students to come to the office, so much so that a lot of faculty that would walk by would ask me, what are you doing? Why are they coming by so much or whatever? And, and really it was just kind of the way we were doing things. The entire sort of comprehensive approach was successful, and they were at least feeling comfortable enough to come by and have discussions. So I used the Moore approach to identifying the presenter for the problem, and so the written grade was basically, a lot of students got frustrated. I learned this in the past. They would write up a solution, and then someone else would get called on, and they got really frustrated that they weren't going to get credit for that. And so I told them that was basically the onus of the impetus for the written work component in the grade. And it gave me an opportunity to see how they're doing. And basically, whether it was their presentations were right or wrong. And so it was 2 points for that varies. But presentations were basically 150, presentations were either right or wrong. Written work was 100, 2 points, 1 point, or 0. And so they were, I was pretty strict in expectation of the quality of their work. What was a little bit different is that I would I would not just have one student presenting at a time. And I told them at the beginning of the semester, part of sort of as a confidence builder, I said, by midterm, we're going to have 8 students at the board at the same time. And that actually happened this last semester, and I didn't even notice it, and a student said, hey, Dr. Garza, you know what? I said, what? They said, we got 8 students at the board, and it was 8. And the reason I thought that was important for me to say at the beginning of the semester is they thought there was no way in the world, they were so nervous about writing proofs, they thought there was no way in the world they were going to get there where 8 of them were going to be at the board at the same time, and it actually happened many times as the semester wore on. Part of the challenge, some people might think that's too many, we ought to have one at a time or whatever, and I understand that. Part of the challenge was I had 25 students, and I was expecting them to present, if they wanted to get an A, I was expecting them to present 5 problems to get an A. And so so automatically, that put a lot of pressure on my organization to get them to get a lot of stuff on the board at the same time. My standard for the proofs was, I said a minute ago that presentations was not what I would call it. They wrote their solutions on the board, and then basically they did not talk us through. I didn't want them drawing pictures. I didn't want them talking it through. I wanted the work to stand on its own. It's a writing intensive course. I wanted a high quality on their writing. And so basically the only time the students spoke when they wrote their work up on the board, the only time they spoke was when they were responding to a question by one of their colleagues, one of their peers, or me. So it was not, and that put more pressure on them to write well. Some would ask, can I put it on the document camera? Why do we have to write all this stuff up on the board? And part of what I've learned is it's very important to respectfully explain why you're doing everything. Because if they think you're just making it up as you go, or if you're being arbitrary in the way you make things up, they're not going to buy in. And the more I have been very deliberate, I'll mention that I have some handouts here, so I put a whole bunch of detail, a 3-page handout, on a lot of the things that I'm doing, including rationale. I tell them, that I just kind of wrote some notes down. That's not my guide, it's not a teacher's guide. It's a student's guide too. I'm very transparent with them because honestly, I don't really care about the assessment. It's something we have to do. I just want to figure things out so that we're talking about mathematics. I mean, that's all I care about. And I want them to be engaged and struggling with the content. Unfortunately, most of them are, as Ken Bain calls them, strategic thinkers. So if you tell them how a grade's assigned, they're going to figure out how to get there and so on. And that's just part of the animal that we deal with. So another thing I do is presenters and the written work, they submit copies of their solution. I scan them. I post them in Dropbox so the students don't have to write all the stuff down as they're watching, as they're reading. I just make it available to them so they can look at this at any time. So again, the focus is on their reading the proofs. And so basically, as the class goes on, once the proofs are all written down, we go one by one, and I sort of coordinate the discussion. Students ask questions, and I will either ask questions of students that didn't present or the presenter, depending on whether I'm wanting to see if the student really wrote the proof or if there's a key part and I want to make sure that certain people understand it. The standard is the work has to stand on its own, and if the student, if one of their peers has a question and about a certain step, that needs more justification, they need to be prepared to provide the justification. Because it's a writing-intensive course, they have to write complete sentences. I don't allow them to use mathematical shorthand. I want them, and so I'm very deliberate about the writing. I want them to get a sense as to what writing good mathematics looks like. And I don't want, usually what I tell them is, if they say, well, is this good enough? If I draw a picture, is that good enough or whatever? And I always tell them, we're not that friendly. And I don't mean that the wrong way, but, kind of the thing I'm always telling them is, it's not so much, their point isn't to please me, their point is we're all looking for the truth. And so, and we're all sort of guardians of the truth, the mathematics being, of course, the truth. And so I try to kind of bring it to a higher standard, I guess, in a sense. Next one. So if the student, again, this is sort of standard Moore method, so if a student presents an invalid solution, so maybe if the class or whatever, through discussion, we decide that the solution is not sufficient, then then the student has another shot at it, or they can relinquish ownership to another student if they want. One of the things that I have discovered, so I mentioned the 8 solutions, that's sort of the trust issue. And they're a little bit put off at the beginning of the semester when I say that we're using the same course notes that they use at the University of Texas at Austin, because they're, and I don't say that to be intimidating or anything like that, but I want them to know, and I use that as an opportunity to tell them, look, they use it there, and you're going to get through this just the way they do, and we do. But it's hard for them to believe, but to some extent, basically what I'm doing is I'm telling them, look, you got to trust me. I've done this before, and we're going to get there. Just like the 8 problem thing. You got to trust me. It's going to happen. And when it does, then they start feeling like there's a process there that's kind of bigger than them. It's method, method, method. I had a student this last semester crying in class because she just felt so much pressure. She just couldn't get stuff done and whatever. She was just having a problem. And I just kept telling them, look, if you'll just do one problem, if you'll get one, you'll get the confidence to do it. Come by and see me. I'll help you. We'll talk about it, whatever. And so many of them wouldn't even come by. And so finally, I sort of adapted, or I made this change mid-semester. So the board work was 40 points. And I said, look, your first one is 24 points. You get 60. Now that seems like a big deal to them. They're thinking, wow, that's great. But if I'm giving 60% of the board work and 60% of the written work, that's just 36% of the total grade. So it's not like I'm giving a huge amount. But basically, it was important to me to say, look, if you get one done, one presentation, one written work done, then things are going to start falling into place, and they do. And so basically, when I did that, they started feeling, it's a senior level class, so a lot of them are worried about graduating or not. And so they're just real stressed about that. So when I gave that and said, look, just get one, then things kind of fell into place, and the dynamics of the classroom kind of changed. When they realized that I wasn't wanting to be the guy who was saying, hey, you're graduating and you're not. I just wanted to be the guy that wanted us talking about math, and that I didn't really care that much about the grade. One of the other things that I sort of have learned is that I don't need to start out, like I just said, I changed something that I did in the beginning of the semester. I'm kind of a stickler for being by the book, and I realized that what I want to see in them is evolution through the semester, and I need to be prepared to evolve as the semester moves on as well. And so one of the things I do, I've always had a little bit of a problem with the whole idea of collaborative work because I like independence and individual development and whatever. But I see the merit in it. And so one of the things that I do now is once midterm comes around, I basically have sort of come to the idea, agree with it or not, I come to the idea that the student that's going to be able to sort of find in themselves the individuality to succeed in the course is probably going to do it by midterm or not. You may agree with that. Or, I don't know whether you do or not, but that's the conclusion I've come to. If they haven't done it by midterm, they maybe aren't going to get there. And so I open it up and I ask them, look, send me the names of 3 students in the class. Email me the names of 3 students in class that you're comfortable working with, and I form informal groups and basically say, okay, now you can talk to me, use your course notes, and these other 3 people as well. Most of them, as it turns out, don't use the other people, actually, the way it plays out. But again, it creates a little bit more of a supportive environment. They feel like they at least have someone to talk to. So it's almost more aesthetic than anything else. So I kind of like that quote up there because so often I've been reading a lot of stuff about student engagement, and so often it seems like we're talking about games and stuff like that. But I think that's really more the point. So So this is a picture of several students at the front board. We have, fortunately, lots of board space in our classrooms. So they're at the front board presenting, and they figured out that the paper somehow just sticks to the board. There's some sort of a tension thing there. And then this is where I'm saying, okay, let's read this problem. And so they have pulled their chairs over to the other side. And they're very, I guess the reason I shared that is they're engaged, they're reading the proof. They wanted to get close and they're reading. So several students have pulled over to the other side so they can see the proof well. And then this is a student, she presented the proof, and she was, like I said, she's not up there presenting, so to speak. She is responding to questions that come up from her peers or from me. So I know, I'll just take one more minute. So one of the things I questioned whether I should share student evaluation stuff, but one of the things that I know I was a department head for a little while, some people early in their careers are afraid to take chances, take risks, because they're afraid that it's going to not go well. And so these were my evaluations from this last semester, and basically they claimed that they averaged about 4.5 hours a week. The grade distributions were pretty good, actually. I only had one F. I think one student dropped the course, but most of the stuff was pretty good. I recognize in my sharing this, you might say, well, you're an easy grader or whatever. You know, I'm just giving data. So you can, I'm not an easy grader, but you can form whatever opinion you want. And these are comments. And the reason I wanted to share these is if you look at these very quickly, they're talking more about the method and the environment than they are about me, or the mathematics, actually. And then if you look at the negative comments, there were more positive than negative, actually. And these aren't really negative. Basically, what they're doing here is they're saying, I didn't like the way the points, you know, they got to present something that I had, and I'm kind of pissed off about that, or whatever. I mean, that's kind of the nature of this. So again, this gives me an opportunity to maybe look at some ways to address their concerns a little bit. They're being strategic. They're trying to, I've given them a framework that I'm going to use to assign a grade, and they're trying to figure out how to game the system. And anyway, so that's it. Are there any questions?
What exactly did you mean by no mathematical shorthand?
Oh, I meant they can't use the there exists symbol or the for every, or, I mean, they can't, I don't let them use that. I want them to write everything out.
Equal signs are okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hello.
So you said that in your real analysis class you expect 8 problems to be presented per day. How?
5. Oh, yeah. At some point, yes. Collectively, yes.
How long are your classes and how often do they meet?
We had 75-minute classes, and oftentimes we did not get through 8. Now, in some cases, when I saw that we had 8 problems to sort of review, I sort of judged it. I had to rein myself in sometimes. When I thought, I mean, one of the great things about this method that those of us who use it know, you get to know what your students know. I mean, you do. And so if I didn't want to ask a question, you know, if there was one where the best student in class presented it and it looked good and they didn't have any questions, we just said, does that look good? Yes, we move on. And so, you know, that gave us about, you know, it took them about 15 minutes to write the stuff down, and then it gave us 60 minutes to discuss. And so I just had to sort of navigate the time a little bit. But there were times when, unfortunately, they hated it. They didn't hate it, but they, you know, sometimes we didn't get to 1 or 2, and they had to start the next class by presenting theirs again. That's just what we did.
And was this 2 days a week?
2 days a week.
Okay, thank you.
I was just wondering what it means to choose the presenters using the Moore style.
So my understanding, I know there's a lot more experts, people that are greater experts than me, but in my experience, basically, I would come into class and I'd say, okay, who's got number 21? And then if 3 people raised their hands, I kind of had kept track of who had presented. And so I called in the person that had presented least frequently, or who had presented the fewest problems to that point. And so that's what I did. And then when it was a tie, then I flipped a coin. I mean, we literally flipped a coin. Okay, thank you.